I'm almost 50, strong, clear, energized. Training hard, living clean, fully alive. But it didn't start here. 30 years ago, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and I felt hopeless. But I chose a different path. No meds, just science, discipline, and results. Now I'm symptom-free and asking the tough questions that move us all forward. This is Hope and Health. Let's go. Welcome to Hope and Health. I'm Mathew Embry. Today we're talking to Kelly Jubenvill, who's been living with multiple sclerosis for over 30 years. She's a mother, she's thriving in life, and an active volunteer. Kelly, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
Kelly, let's go right back to the beginning. 30 years.
Yes, maybe 31, actually, if I think about it. 1994.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought I was well established and all grown up at that time. And of course, as you do when you're 24. And I had finished my degree and I had started a job and I was transitioning into a new career and I'd gotten married. I ticked all these boxes and I was training for a triathlon. So I was cycling to work every day and I was running a 10K after work each day. And then I was going to start bringing in swimming. Again, big plans. And suddenly I had a really strong pain behind one of my eyes. And I thought, well, that's unusual.
Okay, so we are going back 30 years now. So it's 1994.
Yep.
And I was diagnosed in 1995.
Yep.
So 1 year before me, you're an athlete, you're training, and suddenly you get this objective neurological symptom.
Right, which I think is a sinus infection, as does my GP.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you think it's a sinus infection. In my case, I thought it was a pinched nerve. So you think you have a sinus infection. What was the symptom like? And then what happened next? How did it progress?
So it was a really, really sharp pain behind my left eye, sort of into my head, just a tiny bit. I wasn't susceptible to headaches, so it was really foreign to me as pain. And ironically, it felt better when I exercised. So I continued doing everything I was doing.
Okay.
And thought, oh, this will improve as time goes on. And what we realized is it wasn't going to improve. And suddenly I lost vision centrally in my eye. So peripherally, I could see. Centrally, you would look like something that had been censored out to me.
Interesting. So was that scary? What was that like?
Yeah, that was even more alarming. But it did give my GP at the time a big clue. So, and he was really great about saying, let's get you tested for something called optic neuritis.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so did that mean anything to you at the time?
Nothing at all.
And did you think this is just something that can pass, that there's something that's just going to go away?
I didn't actually give it much thought at all, honestly. I trusted my GP. At that time, I also had a little bit of tingling in my feet. I was not connecting any of the dots whatsoever.
Okay, so what's the path like next? I mean, for people diagnosed with multiple sclerosis or other neurological conditions, sometimes it can take a long time in the medical system to get there, to get that official diagnosis. What was it like for you?
So I mentioned a GP that I had at the time, really great. He's still my GP today, so 31 years later. He chose to navigate this as a diagnosis of the optic neuritis. And how he presented that to me is that over 90% of the time, this is affiliated with multiple sclerosis. And he gave me the option to go and get a diagnosis at that time. But he also knew that I was young. I had started my career. I hadn't started my family yet. And he knew that I may not want that diagnosis right now.
And why would you not want a diagnosis for that?
For insurance purposes.
Got it.
So at that time, I had a diagnosis of optic neuritis, and I understood that it could mean MS. Mm-hmm. And then I ran off to a library.
Okay. And then what was next after that? So how did your journey go?
So for everybody who's not familiar with a library, it is like the book version of Google.
Okay.
So that's what I did because Google didn't exist.
Yeah.
So I went to find positive books on MS. When I was growing up, my mom had a very close friend with MS, and I affiliated certain conditions and symptoms with MS, and they were not a positive vision for me. And I wanted a different vision and a different outcome.
So what was that vision for you?
I wanted a vision where I could still be active. I wanted a vision where I could manage the symptoms or the disease. And I wanted to understand that if for all the other things that were out there, like heart disease or anything else like that, that I could manage for a healthy brain instead of managing for a disease.
Now, back in 1994, this is just when some of the MS drugs were starting to hit the market and to be able to reach patients. So for you and the research you did, what did you start to see? What did you find? And what did you do?
I found some positive memoirs. That was really great. And then I found the swank diet. And that had been based on what was then research, which was then reevaluated to not be research, but dating back to the 1940s in the UK of folks following the swank diet and how well they were doing on it. And I thought, why not? I'm already a pretty healthy eater. I can do this. And I changed my eating habits overnight and thought, why not? If this is based on my brain health and my immunity, then why wouldn't I eat better?
Now, for people who aren't too familiar with the swank diet, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's primarily making sure your saturated fat is incredibly low.
It was no red meat for the first year. It was no alcohol. It was low saturated fats or none. It was healthy eating. Honestly, it was akin to almost a heart healthy diet.
And there was research, I recall, because when I was first diagnosed, that there was a chart, there's a graph in that book that showed patients that went on the diet and patients that didn't, and showed the patients who didn't go on the diet, they went down significantly in terms of neurogrades. And the patients that went on the diet, they seemed relatively stable and only went down one neurograde over, I think it was 15 to 20 years.
Yeah, you're correct. And if you recall, that book, I think, was first published in the 70s or 80s. We'd have to check the dates on that. And I was reading it in 94. So it still seemed to be a valid publication. Again, you couldn't Google swank at that time to find out, but I thought I have nothing to lose and everything to gain. And I followed it, but I also followed the idea that exercise to fatigue was not necessarily good for you. And I learned after a few years that I could test my boundaries and that I actually could reincorporate a lot of exercise back into my life. So I did take a hiatus.
So you go to the library, you're advocating more or less for yourself, and you're learning as much as you possibly can about the disease, I'm assuming, and the possible ways to treat it.
Yep.
And you decide to radically change your diet. What does that look like day one for someone who's considering it? What were the steps you took to do that?
Nothing major. It meant just incorporating more fish. It meant not incorporating a lot of additives into any of my foods. Healthy eating was possible then, and it was affordable. I probably missed two things back then about myself that I have since learned and understood to be why I was probably more in a position to be susceptible to MS, and that is my gut health at the time. I am lactose intolerant and have been my entire life, and had dairy in my life. I also have the major markers for celiac disease and have several children with celiac disease. So I also would have had wheat or gluten in my diet. So
you start the diet. Do you start to notice any kind of changes? Like what starts to shift for you?
The optic neuritis resolves for me. Any tingling that I have in my feet resolves for me. I didn't experience a lot of fatigue. And I think that maybe because I did switch things up right away for myself. So it really, again, I just felt healthy. I wasn't exercising as much as I would have been. And when I started to reincorporate that into my world, I felt healthy and strong. I felt a little bit of fear. So where I would run a 10K, now I would run a 5K. And I gave myself boundaries.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do those look like?
They look like you are going to work out, but you're not going to try and achieve anything. You're going to do it as your medicine. You're going to do it as your prescription.
Right.
So you're going to do one thing a day. If the thing is walking your dogs, that's going to be the thing that day. If your thing is going for a run, that's going to be a thing. If it's going for a swim, okay, great.
So you're more or less just setting up habits.
Yeah. I'm saying that's my medicine. Food is my medicine. Exercise is my medicine. I did restorative yoga along the way, and meditation is my medicine. Sleep is my medicine.
So at the time, did you check in with your doctor and say, hey, like I've done some reading, I'm going to change my diet. What do you think?
Yeah, full support. I did. I wish I could tell you differently. I wish I could tell you I had a GP who said, let's get you off to a neurologist. You're right. The drugs were beginning to come onto the market at that time. Let's try a protocol for you. I didn't. I had the opposite experience. I had an incredibly supportive GP that when I said, look, I think there's something to do with vitamin D and my health. Can we pursue that? He said, yes, the research is there. That is exactly what you should be doing.
Well, and I think sometimes in the MS community, and sometimes especially in the online forums, we see a lot of negativity towards doctors. And some of it's justified, but at the same time, sometimes there are doctors that are incredible and support us. And your journey, in your case, seems to be like that was one of them. Here we are 30 years later. You're really healthy. You've still got the same GP.
Yes, I feel like I'm very lucky. I actually feel like I just had a lot of luck, honestly. And I also felt like I didn't have to define myself by MS.
Kelly, what do you mean by defining yourself by a disease?
I guess I wasn't at the time, and as time went by, waking up every day and going, oh my gosh, I have MS. I think I rebranded it in my brain, and I'll share what that was. For me, it was many strengths. I would say, okay, if MS is going to be my thing, then these are my many strengths. And it had nothing to do with having a disease.
Now, you're 24 years old at the time. What did you want out of life at that time? And did you think MS was going to hold you back?
Yes, I wanted a family still. And I was concerned about what that would mean if I was pregnant, what that would mean if I had small children. I did go on to have a family, and I went big. I had twins as my first children, and then I had a baby a year later.
Now, before we get into what it's like to manage a whole family with this type of diet and exercise protocol, what was the evolution of, say, your journey in the medical system? Did you eventually get an MS diagnosis?
Yeah, I went eventually when I decided to quit working full-time or part-time with my kids and be home for a while. I chose to go and get my MRI and confirm my diagnosis.
Got it. And once you knew that, your program also evolved. You also took on different dietary strategies other than what Dr. Swank had recommended. Can you share with us how you got there and how strict your diet became?
Yeah, I think it was a fine tuning. I think for everyone, there are things in your life. As I mentioned, I'm lactose intolerant, and dairy is part of the Swank diet. It's not for me. And then what did it mean to complement that with other things if I didn't have dairy in my diet? As my children grew up and we found out about the celiac disease and found out it really does originate from myself, that we just evolved to remove the gluten from my diet as well, as a family.
So your diet just naturally became dairy-free, gluten-free,
Yes.
low saturated fat?
Low processed foods or no processed foods if you could avoid them. I do have a really strong addiction to dark chocolate that remains in my diet today. So there are some things that I haven't been able to kick. But for the most part, I just look to food as fuel. And I love taste and I love enjoying food, but I feel like there are so many options and I have the privilege of enjoying those and in my life. I guess we should state that affordability is part of this success strategy.
It's true. It's not a cheap
Right?
diet.
This is a privilege to be able to go out and choose the foods I need and want and prepare them for my family. I did modify a little bit to have certain things that I would eat and modify then for the family what they would eat. But for the most part, we could incorporate healthy eating for everybody.
Now, what about vitamin D? Was that a part of your journey too?
Yeah, early research on vitamin D. Again, I mentioned with my GP, I went directly to my GP to confirm and to understand if this was going to be important for me, and it was. So I increased my vitamin D almost immediately based on that.
Okay, so now let's go back a bit. So now you're, say, 24, 25, 26. You've got your program set up for yourself. You've redefined what you think your outcome is going to be after being diagnosed with a chronic illness.
Yes.
You've made the choice to live, I hate using the word normal life because I don't believe there's anything normal, but there's certain, say, life markers that you wanted to achieve and you went after it. How hard was it to maintain your lifestyle in that journey?
For me, it was a commitment. It was a commitment to understanding that if I was going to be healthy at this age today, I was going to have to sacrifice some things when I was a little bit younger. And sacrifice is a strong word, but I was going to have to make choices. And I don't want to give everybody the impression that you stick to those choices 100% of the time, because you don't, but you try hard to. And you know that there is something to achieve by doing that. And you know that you will have time with your kids. And you know that you will spend time traveling, or you will spend time exercising or enjoying nature or whatever it happens to be, being active in life. I look at my life and I feel like I have an incredibly active life.
Now, there's a lot of people who have young children who get diagnosed. I mean,
Yes.
that people are diagnosed, more or less between 25 and say 40. So that in that stage of life, a lot of people have young kids. How hard was it for you to raise a young family, stay on the program? Did you have them on the program? What were those choices like?
Okay, I did have cravings during pregnancy.
Yeah.
And one of them was dairy, ironically. So I really had to recognize, was I going to have a milkshake? And at the time I was carrying twins, and I think your body just takes over at that point, and your body goes, this is what you need.
Yeah.
So while I would say I held steadfast to that, I probably had milkshakes while I was pregnant. Is that the strongest choice for me? No, but I think you just recognize whatever your body's telling you at that time. So during pregnancy, your immune system actually sort of jumps itself up a little bit.
Right.
And there's a concern there that it's going to attack itself also a little bit. That wasn't the case for me. What I learned to understand afterwards is that you're protecting yourself during that pregnancy. It's that time right after you deliver that you're already somewhat exhausted through the later stages of your pregnancy, and then you have a small child, generally one. In this case, I had two. So I was really, really lucky. My kids were full-term babies. They were giants, and they slept and they ate, and, I could bring them home right away. I've since volunteered a lot with multiples and small children, and I know how lucky I was. Again, a lot of luck. I consider myself incredibly grateful. So during those times, I am not a person who it's easy to ask for help and support, and I had to ask for lots of help and support and let people help me. So let grandparents come over and be an integral part of my kid's life, right? Let anyone around me who was offering to come and be supportive into my world.
Yeah, I mean, when I had kids, when they were looking back, many years ago now, when they were babies, things I found challenging were finding time to exercise, etching out those types of hours. For us, our kids relatively ate similar to our diet, or the best bet diet. Did you do the same thing?
Yeah, my kids just sort of followed along what I did. Yeah, whatever you were used to making and cooking and preparing. Yes, there were probably some kid foods in there. And we all know what those are.
Yeah.
Everybody knows what a kid food might look like. It might be a chicken nugget at the time. It might be. But there was a joke around our house about mine are going to be quinoa. Mine are going to be, right. So they looked like kid food, but they were always very, very healthy. My kids always went to the neighbors if they wanted something unhealthy.
Yeah, I've had the same issues.
Yeah. You got that one neighbor on your block who's super great about letting your kid in their pantry.
Yeah. It's problematic. Now, have you had to do, what was it like to tell your kids about, why you eat this way?
That's a really good question. I'm going to circle back really quickly before that and talk about exercise post-baby. Sure. I was the mom who would feed twins and then maybe hop off to a swimming pool and get a swim in and take my kids with me. So I had no problem having my kids be portable with me if it meant I could squeeze in some exercise, to your point about how do you fit in exercise as a new parent.
Yeah, I was very much the same. I went through 2 baby joggers.
Yep. We had joggers, and they were on bikes, and I was on rollerblades, and I was obviously walking a lot with my kids. Yeah,
I found integration was key to that in the swimming pool, and using the babysitters there for the half hour, and I was on the exact same path.
Yeah.
But I agree. I was lucky my parents lived in the city.
Yes, again, lucky and very grateful.
Yeah. So
sorry, back to your question now.
Oh, no. I think these are really important things for people to know, because we can talk about eating a certain way, having a certain lifestyle, but when it gets down to it, how do you do it?
Right. This is what it looked like. I had 2 babies in a jogger. I had a baby on a backpack. I had 2 dogs.
Yeah.
So I just wanted you to visualize this. And I'm out walking in the neighborhood. Sometimes I'd rollerblade in the neighborhood. If it was cycling, I would have 2 babies in a jogger and one on a seat in the back of my bike. That's what it looked like.
I agree. And I don't know about you, but I found it never ended. So even as the kids got older and we'd be at soccer, I would just go run during soccer.
I did do that a lot with kids sports. If I was at kids sports, my kids were swimmers, or at the synchro, I was not often the mom in the stands. I was the mom going to find the class or going for a walk or going for a run. Those were great opportunities, because other than that, you're driving a lot in a car.
I found the exact same thing. I would change in the back seat of the car at times.
Yeah.
just to get it done.
Yeah.
But with the kids, what was that
Sorry.
conversation like to share with your journey?
Right. I don't recall when I told my kids.
Huh.
So, because and there's this invisibility of disease sometimes that we see with certain diseases for certain folks if you're not presenting symptoms. I did have that. So things for my kids, my family, my coworkers, people around me, they weren't aware I had MS. And I don't think I was ashamed to share it or that it was a problem for me, other than if I did share it, there was a look that would come across people's faces. And again, they had the same preconceived notions about what MS was that I had. So I don't blame anyone for that. I just didn't feel comfortable sharing a lot. And it wasn't impacting my kids' lives. I do know that they were aware before junior high, I would say, ages. And for anyone else in your audience, that's sort of before they were about 13 years old, because the curriculum covers MS by that point.
Right.
And my kids shared in school that their mom had MS. And that did create a bit of a ruffle because teachers were concerned, other parents were concerned, kids were concerned,
Right.
and they had to say, no, my mom seems to be okay.
Yeah.
And I don't think, again, that they recognized that. They were just sharing at the time. And I remember having those conversations.
So Kelly, your kids find out that you have MS. They're learning in school about multiple sclerosis. Now they've shared with the school. People are worried. Were they worried?
I think they did have some worries, and I don't know that they fully shared it. I do know over the years they would ask me how I was doing and how I was feeling and if everything was okay. I think they were checking in to make sure. So I think I just made a point of also confirming with them how I was feeling and always being honest, right? I did have what I considered to be a relapse, but I don't know if it was fully related to MS, in about 2005. So I had someone in kindergarten at the time, or for everyone else, about a 5-year-old. And I don't think it was visible to them. So it wasn't anything we discussed or chatted about. And in those junior high years, because 2 of my kids at that point had been diagnosed with celiac disease and had to manage a disease that related to diet, it was really easy to draw those parallels. To say, well, you know what, we're managing this for you and you've had to change your diet and it was a really big deal for you and I appreciate how hard that was for you. This is the same thing I had to do.
Now, Kelly, in both of our journeys, I see some similarities. We're diagnosed around the same time. We had a very similar attitude in how we approached it through nutrition and exercise. But we also didn't want to share publicly that we had the disease with people at work or certain friends. Why do you think that is?
Stigma. And I don't know if the stigma was real, but I think it was, at least in my mind, that people would treat me differently, that I wouldn't necessarily have opportunities available to me. At the time with work, before that, I'd been traveling for work. And around the world. So I wanted to be able to continue to do that. I wanted to have opportunities for progression. I think I was concerned that those things would go away. I think maybe I thought friends would look at me differently or think of me differently at the time, treat me differently.
Now, did that change over time?
Yes, now I feel like people are more versed in the disease and understand the disease. I think as a whole, society is having larger and bigger conversations about a lot of health conditions, about mental wellness, about any thing we're really comfortable with now. And I don't hesitate now to integrate it into conversation if it's relevant. If it's not really relevant, then I don't.
Well, I mean, you're doing this podcast now. It's going to be on national TV. Like, why have you chosen to do this, to step out and to share your story?
I think I was hesitant to. I'm going to tell you this because my story doesn't look like everyone else's story. As you mentioned, when our diagnoses happened, the medical protocols weren't there. And I think there is a pathway now that happens for individuals that as soon as they get their diagnosis, they might be referred to a neurologist. And while that's fantastic and they're supportive, I think that they're put on a track sometimes, or can be that track. And I understand why that happens. And I can understand why that's actually pretty supportive for a person, because they feel like they're taking action and they want to manage their disease in a certain way. My feeling is that it was really helpful for me to pause. It was really helpful for me to go, what else do I need to change in my world to stay healthy in my world and to not necessarily pursue a medication for the disease at the time, because at the time there was no proven medication that would halt progression.
Mm-hmm.
I know that now. I don't know that I knew that then, but I do know that now. And I went through optic neuritis and came out the other side of it, and I haven't had an issue with my eye since.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't had progression since. I've been really lucky that way. And for me, I think it's just important to share another story that could look differently for people.
Mm-hmm.
And I know when I tell this story, people listen and they're really polite and kind about it, and they nod and they appreciate me sharing my story, but they don't necessarily believe it's a path for them.
And why do you think that is?
Because MS is a complex disease and everyone's is individual, and it can't be that simple.
Mm.
And also, I think it's scary to trust yourself only with managing your disease. I think it's just far easier sometimes to understand that there's a medical community out there who offers support, and it would be really helpful to have that support. So I fully understand it, honestly, but I think it means for someone like me with a story like mine or a story like yours that they're politely listened to, and a lot of people move on.
Mm-hmm. Can we talk about the process of continuing to educate yourself about the disease and say new breakthroughs or new treatments? For me, it's never stopped. It's been 30 years of constantly looking at what's coming, the newest research, the newest ideas. What about you? Do you continue that process?
Yes, and Direct MS at the time probably helped me with that. I was following the work that they were doing. I was following the research. Because I'm based in Calgary, I would go to the presentations and follow that research. So yes, I've had a similar path to you, that I'm continually looking to understand the why behind the disease, and then why that lines up with what I was doing and succeeding. So while I consider myself incredibly lucky and I am incredibly grateful, I now understand that the why to what I was doing lines up with what the disease is evolving to be based on research.
Can you explain that further?
The research coming out over the past years and the studies, that long-term studies in the States, indicate that Epstein-Barr has a significant contribution to this being a lung virus.
Mm-hmm.
And so me managing my diet, my exercise, my sleep, my well-being and mental wellness means that I'm managing my immunity and I'm keeping it balanced and healthy. And that goes a long way in managing a virus that's long-term in your body.
Mm-hmm. Now, for viewers who aren't as educated as you and I, Epstein-Barr is a virus. It's mono. And so 100% of people with multiple sclerosis have got this virus, and this is cutting edge information that's coming out. And what you're suggesting is that this program is like an antiviral. It's an antiviral approach. And if we think about it in terms of if it is a virus, MS could be like long COVID. And then how are you going to manage that over a long period of time? Can we also talk about some of the volunteer efforts that you're making in the community? I mean, you mentioned Direct MS, and for people who don't know what that is what MS Hope used to be, the name of the title. You were a board member there.
Correct.
You've been engaged in the community. Why have you made those steps?
I think because I wasn't visible in my disease and management of my disease outwardly to the world, I felt like I was a really great project manager, operations consultant, volunteer in the community, board member, and that was where I could make my contribution. So while I wasn't outward as I am in this podcast, I felt like I could still be behind the scenes and help move the conversation forward.
How important do you think it is to get this information out to the public? And do you think enough of it's getting out there right now?
I don't think enough of it is getting out there right now. I do see mainstream organizations adopting the idea that diet is incredibly important, and exercise and all of the things that we talk about in lifestyle. I do see a shift, but I don't necessarily think it's in practice. So I can see some major organizations supporting it. I understand, the reach that MS Hope has and why that's incredibly important. Where I don't think it's necessarily translating is maybe in a doctor's office, or maybe with your neurologist, or maybe in a conversation with your friends in your community.
And do you think those systems are changing at all? Or so sometimes I think there's like two systems emerging here. There's that current system, and then we have this online system, and where we're getting this bombarded by information, which is really challenging for patients to be able to curate the best stuff. Can you comment on those two spaces?
I don't know that I'm the best equipped to comment on those spaces. I don't, because I had an irregular journey through the disease, I would actually love to know more about what someone who is newly diagnosed is experiencing who might have been my age today. You know, if you're 24 years old today and you're experiencing a symptom like you or I had, and you're scared and you're in your doctor's office and you're going through it, I think I would love to appreciate and understand what that journey looks like and how it differed from my journey, because I don't know that those folks have this information presented to them at that time as a viable option for them.
Well, you've taken this information. You're 30 years out from your diagnosis.
Yeah.
Incredibly healthy right now. What have been your biggest challenges in the last 3 decades?
I've had some major life challenges like everyone else. None of them have really been related to managing MS in my life, honestly. Because it's, as you say, when I established those routines early on, they just became part of my life. It became, what does brain health have to do with my day to day? So maybe I'm going to take a new class and learn Zumba today. That's going to be great for my brain health, right? And if I am experiencing high levels of stress or things that I need to manage in my world, that is front and center in my management plan, is what is this doing to my immune system? What is this doing to my brain health? What do I need to be doing to calm all of that down? And how do I navigate through this to keep my immunity in a place that is super healthy?
What kind of things do you do to keep your stress under control?
I like sleep. So I try to get as much sleep as I humanly can, and keep a regular sleep schedule. Go to sleep at the same time, wake up at the same time. That's really important for me. Technology and I have it integrated into my life for work, but it's not a big part of my social life. So technology in the evenings is not an issue for me, and that really, really helps me get my mind and my brain ready for sleep and follow routine, just like we would with our kids when they were little and preparing them to sleep. I think it's huge. I think your brain recovers while you sleep. And for me, that's crucial.
Let's talk about doing your program and living with the disease through different phases of life. What have been the major phases of life for you where you've seen changes and you've had to adapt?
Right. So that first phase post-diagnosis, I would admit I was, demoralized and sad and scared like everyone else. I don't want to give everyone the impression that I just woke up one day, went to the library, and everything was great. That isn't what happened. I had to recognize that this disease was going to be part of my life. I was not happy about it. I saw a vision in my world that I wasn't going to be happy with. So I think I went through that first acknowledgement phase and probably grieved like everybody else did, honestly. And like I say, I pulled a lot of things out of my life and I had to bring them back in slowly. So, that was a very scary time for me. I think once I realized that I could get past about that 3, 4, 5 year mark and I wasn't seeing any challenges, then I knew I could move forward with my life. And I went forward in having my family. And I would say that family phase, again, I had fear, but I kept my research up. I kept my support with my GP. I kept my diet on track as much as I could and my health and exercise, and kept them going through those years, even with small kids, and lots of them. They outnumbered me significantly, and not enough hands for them, and asking for support or getting support through that time. So that phase of growing into your life with small children, I think we were all exhausted. I don't remember feeling that exhausted because I remember relying on people and saying yes. Really hard to do. Very hard to do.
Right. And then what about now? Where are you today?
Yeah. So today, different phase of my life. My career is still on, but I can choose how much I work. So I'm lucky that way. It doesn't overwhelm me and it doesn't stress me. I am in a stage and phase that we don't talk about, which is post-menopause for women with MS.
Okay.
And I think that's like an important conversation to talk about because your immune system automatically changes. So that's, again, it's that scarier time for me of understanding, well, what does that mean if My immune system is not going to react the way I want it to, or as healthy as it was before. What do I need to be doing in my life to manage that? A lot of women struggle with sleep during this phase of their life with hormonal change. They struggle with stress and heightened anxiety and all of those symptoms. So I think it's really important to start the conversation of what do you need to do again in this phase of your life as a post-menopausal woman to keep those stress levels low so your immunity stays balanced.
Now, people who watch our podcast and watch our content, they want to know the how-tos. So is there any how-to advice you'd give people who are in this stage?
Don't be afraid to ask for help. In all of this, there's been that theme of be willing to accept help. In this case, it's don't be in a position where you're willing to ask for the help. Again, these aren't easy conversations that women have anyways with their GPs, with their specialists. And sometimes their GPs aren't versed. So seek out a doctor who can talk to you about hormonal balance and menopause and post-menopause health. And there are a few experts here in Alberta, but wherever you are in the world too, you've got to take yourself out of your comfort zone and you've got to go and ask the questions and the hard questions. And I would say, we talk about a world where things are a bit siloed. Mm-hmm. There are Instagram streams going for all of this stuff. And there's a conversation with your GP or your specialist. And those are two very different things sometimes. So I think that can be resourceful, but I always feel like you should just go back that up with a real conversation somewhere and real research behind it.
And how are you doing today? Like, where are things at for Kelly right now?
Like symptom-wise or health-wise or life-wise? Yeah, I'm good. This is a really uneventful interview. And, that was my hesitation in doing this because there's no tagline here that says I'm really struggling, because I'm really happy to say I'm not.
Oh, no. I hope we don't come across that that's why we want to do these.
No, not at all. But I spent my summer golfing 18 holes when I could and walking a golf course. In the winter, will go downhill skiing and cross-country skiing. I walk my dog every day. If I go swimming, I can go swimming. If my kid goes to a climbing wall and invites me, I can go. Mm-hmm. I feel like I'm participating in life.
Yeah, and I think why that story is so important is because there is a 23, 24-year-old young woman who's just been diagnosed, who may be watching this and see you, and that's exactly where she wants to be. And I think that's why that's why we do this.
Yes.
Is to show that this is possible and what are the possibilities of this, and then try our best to show people the roadmap of how you got there. Now, there are a lot of people who will hear this information and think this is an impossible lifestyle or way to live. Have you seen that? And why do you think that is?
Yeah, this is something that I really am curious about, honestly. What is it in a mindset that allows someone to make a really tough choice for themselves, mm-hmm. or what they see as tough or different, or possibly a compromise, and then commit to that? And I think the answer there is that reiteration, honestly. That we try things on, that we see if they're working, and if they're not working, we can reiterate. In other words, if I try the diet and for 1 week in my life, I fall off the rails and I don't follow it, that's okay. Mm-hmm. Because, for 51 other weeks, you might follow the diet. For half of the year, you might follow, a more restrictive diet. That's okay. I think that something is better than nothing. And if you're in a situation where you think you can't quite do it all, don't put that expectation on yourself. Mm-hmm. Do something. Do a little bit. Do as much as you can. And if something's not working, reiterate and try something else.
Mm-hmm. I think one major issue that doesn't get talked about enough is food addiction. Mm-hmm. I think food addiction is a serious issue in our society, and especially, you just drive down. How many billboards did you see on the way driving here? How many commercials are on television? Driving it. And for people, it's very challenging for them to be able to think of sticking to this kind of diet for an extended period of time.
Yes, and cost.
Mm-hmm. Cost is another big one.
Right? There's huge barriers to this.
Yeah. And access. In different countries, for people who are watching this, getting gluten-free breads, things like that, is not easy. And I think another piece of this, you mentioned a word luck that you said a couple times today. It's a word that I don't know if I believe in. Yeah. Because from my perspective, education is huge.
Yes.
The more that someone educates themselves about the disease and why we talk about these strategies, I think the easier it becomes to stick to them because you can understand what these foods are potentially doing to your body.
I agree. And I'm not sure why I use luck so much other than I just feel like whatever happens, I seem to trip over what I need the most for this. The bit of information that I need, the strategy that will help me as I navigate through this. So in a strange way, that makes me feel lucky because I know that other people have very different paths with this disease.
Now, for me, it's been, again, 30 years like you, how I've kind of made sense of my life with this disease. It's somehow taught me disciplines that I don't think I ever would have engaged in if I wasn't diagnosed. On some way, for me, I've seen it as a gift where it's gotten me today. Do you have a similar perspective on it?
Yes, I run that alternate life movie. Do you have one of those?
No. Well, I call it play the movie forward.
Yes.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
So my alternate life movie might look like this. Let's say that optic neuritis never happened, that tingling never happened, that this never led to a diagnosis. I probably would have continued to train triathlons and maybe competed in them. I probably would have been a long-term runner. I probably would have had a lot of things, injuries, repetitive injuries, health issues, possibly present from that. I may not have eaten as well as I should have. I may have had more alcohol than I needed, which we now understand, the part that alcohol plays in our life. So I probably would have had a lot less healthy life over the long time than I have managing MS.
Mm-hmm. If you had any advice, someone's diagnosed right now, what is your key advice to them?
Pause. Yeah, grieve. Understand what the disease means, educate yourself, and just take a breath and pause before you make major decisions in your life, honestly, and then seek out information.
Kelly, thank you so much. And I want to personally thank you. I know we've known each other for a long time, and I don't say it enough. You've been an inspiration to me and a barometer. You're one of those people who, if you're doing good, it gives me confidence that I'm on the right path. So thank you for sharing your story with me and with the world.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks for joining us. Hope and Health is made possible through generous donations. To learn more or support the show, visit mshope.com, where you'll find free science-based resources.